On May 15, 2025, after spending 28 years on death row, Glen Edward Rogers was executed by lethal injection in Florida. His crimes were as brutal, they were senseless, leaving a trail of devastation. In this video, we'll uncover what happened, his last meal and his last words. Glen Rogers had many names. To some, he was the Casanova killer. To others, the cross-country killer. He wasn't just another name on death row. He once claimed to have committed more than 70 murders. But long before courtrooms and mugshots, Glen was just a kid from Hamilton, Ohio. And that's where the story began. Born on July 15, 1962, Glen was one of 7 siblings, raised in a home that could barely contain the chaos. His father worked at a paper mill and his red-haired mother ruled the house with a heavy hand. Glen was smart in his own way, but never seemed to settle. He was expelled from school by 16. And at the age of 17, he was already married to a 14-year-old girl who he got pregnant. They 2 kids together, but the marriage didn't last. His wife accused him of abuse and filed for divorce. From there, things got worse. Glen drifted. He drank, fought, and he stole. By the early 90s, he had already developed a reputation as a manipulator. He was charming to strangers, but dangerous to anyone who got too close. In 1993, he drifted back into town, low on money and out of options. But his mother wouldn't take him in. Instead, Mark Peters did. A 71-year-old Air Force veteran, retired electrician and family friend, Mark offered Glen a room and a second chance. He trusted him, but that cost him his life. Not long after Glen moved in, Mark disappeared. At first, there wasn't much to go on. His car was gone, guns, his coin collection also gone. And so was Glen. Police spent months trying to piece together what happened, but they came up empty. Then, in January 1994, a tip came from inside Glen's own family. His brother pointed detectives to an old hunting cabin across the state line in Kentucky. Inside, they found a chair buried under furniture, and tied to it were the decaying remains of Mark Peters. The scene told its own story. Mark hadn't left. He'd been bound, hidden, and left to rot by the man he once trusted enough to share his home with. But Glen wasn't done. And that was just the beginning of his killing spree. On the night of September the 28th, 1995, in Venice, California, Glen crossed paths with Sandra Gallagher at a bar. She was 33, a mother of 3, lucky, and ready to celebrate a 1/250 lottery win. But from across the room, Glen wasn't celebrating. He was watching her. Glen always watched, not for beauty, but for weakness. He studied body language, searching for cracks. A woman who held herself with confidence, he'd pass. But someone with softer shoulders, a tired smile, maybe little too trusting. That's who he was waiting for, and Sandra didn't see it coming. By the time she stepped onto the dance floor, Glen had already made his choice. They left together, and just hours later, her body was found inside her burning truck. She had been raped and strangled to death, and the fire was only set to cover up the crime. But by the time Sandra Gallagher's body was found, Glen was already in Jackson, Mississippi. He kept a low profile, avoided using his real name, and skipped bars where he might be recognized. A federal warrant was already out for him, but he didn't know it yet. In Jackson, Glen drifted from one cheap motel to the next. And in early October, just weeks after Sandra's murder, Glen showed up at the Mississippi State Fair. And that's where he met Linda Price. Linda was 34, a single mother of 2 teenage children, and a rough history when it came to men. But Glen didn't look like trouble, at least not at first. He was charming, easy to talk to, and knew exactly what to say. Within days of meeting, he moved in with her. Then, on November 3rd, everything went silent. Linda's family started to worry. She hadn't called, visited, and wasn't answering the phone. And when they couldn't reach her, they called the police and asked for a welfare check. what officers found inside was horrific. Linda was lying face down in the bathtub, naked and submerged in shallow water. Her body showed 4 deep stab wounds, 2 in the chest, back, and her throat had been slashed. Her red dots and pickup was gone, so were her purse, jewellery, and the man she'd been living with. The scene was cold and methodical. Whoever killed her had tried to clean up. A bloody mop sat in the kitchen sink. Crumpled, blood-soaked paper towels filled the trash, and on the floor, smeared streaks told the story of someone who had started to clean, but quickly realised the mess was more than they could hide. And one detail stood out. On the bathroom mirror, written in lipstick, was a message. "Glen, we found you." On the surface, it looked like someone had come looking for Glen, found Linda instead, and killed her as a warning. At least that's what the killer wanted it to look like. But detectives weren't buying it. The message felt staged, sloppy. A poor attempt to send them in the wrong direction, and it didn't work. But once again, Glen was on the move. After Linda's murder, he vanished again, this time boarding a bus headed west. He ended up in Bossier City, Louisiana, a quiet suburb outside Shreveport. There, in a local bar, he struck up conversation with 37-year-old Andy Sutton. They talked, hit it off, and by the end of the night, she invited him home. But just like that, he left, and no one knows why. Glen boarded another bus and headed south to Florida. In Tampa, he checked into a room at the Tampa 8 Inn and paid for 3 nights in cash. On November 5th, he walked into a bar called Showtown, USA. 4 women were sitting together after their shifts, laughing and letting the night wind down. Glen spotted one of them almost immediately, Tina Marie Cribbs. She was 34, a mother of 2, and worked as maid at an inn in Apollo Beach. He turned on the charm. Glen was fit, confident, and quick with stories. He danced, he bought drinks, and made sure everyone noticed him. "He was picking us out like oranges," one of the women later said. And she was right in more ways than one. Every woman Glen had targeted so far had something in common. They all had red hair, just like his mother. Before the night ended, he asked Tina for a ride back to his motel, and she agreed. Maybe she trusted him. She just didn't want to be rude. She ordered one last drink, turned to her friends, and said she'd be back in 10 minutes, but she never returned. 2 days after Tina vanished, police found her body in room 119 of the Tampa 8 Inn. She lay face down in the bathtub, blood splattered across the tile. Someone had stabbed her multiple times, both front and back. Like the others, her body had been rinsed clean, and her purse, diamond ring, and gold watch were gone. Witnesses remembered seeing her with a man, Glen Rogers, and one clerk said Glen walked out of the room alone, told them not to clean just yet, and left the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the knob. Then he vanished in Tina's white Ford Festivar. But Glen's trail wasn't as clean as he thought. Investigators in several states began connecting the dots. California, Mississippi, and now Florida. The same pattern, the man. America's Most Wanted aired a segment featuring his face, and newspapers across the country picked up story. Detectives canvassed carnival sites around Tampa, hoping one of the workers might have seen him. But for a while, Glen stayed ahead. He circled back to Louisiana, back to Andy Sutton. She had missed him, and when he showed up again, she welcomed him without hesitation. They went out drinking, going from one bar to another, laughing like nothing had changed. People remembered how well he treated her. He smiled, joked, and fit in so easily. No one suspected what was coming. That changed on the morning of November the 9th, when Andy's roommate came home to a nightmare. Andy was lying across a leaking waterbed, blood soaking into the mattress. The wounds were brutal. Her chest had been torn open with a large blade, and the autopsy later found 6 more stab wounds in her back. And once again, Glen was gone. He had waited until the roommate fell asleep on the couch before making his move. She didn't hear a thing, only noticed her purse missing when she woke. But outside, neighbours spotted Glen loading up a car, the same one he had stolen from his last victim in Florida. And within hours, Louisiana added its name to the growing list of states searching for Glen Rogers. That same day, November the 9th, 1995, police finally caught up with him in Kentucky. He was still behind the wheel of Tina's white Ford Festiva, probably trying to hunt down his next victim. But when the police attempted to pull him over, he took off. What followed was a 13-mile chase across the highway until a trooper finally rammed his vehicle off the road. Glen was dragged from the car and arrested. His run was over. In 1997, he stood trial for Tina's murder in Florida and was sentenced to death. 2 years later, California put him on trial for the murder of Sandra. The result was the same, another death sentence. And with that, Glen Rogers became one of the few men in US history facing execution in 2 different states. But there's more to Glen's story, at least according to him. In 2012, a documentary aired on cable TV. In it, Glen claimed he was the one behind the 1994 murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. He said O.J. Simpson had hired him to break into Nicole's home and steal jewelry. According to Glen, O.J. told him, "You may have to kill." Tari, Glen's brother, Clay, backed up parts of the story, saying that Glen had talked about working for Nicole in 1994. He also claimed that Glen threatened her and that he later confessed to killing her, but the police didn't buy it. The LAPD stood firm, issuing a statement that they were confident in the case they built years ago. Ron Goldman's father echoed that response. The overwhelming evidence proved that one and only person murdered Nicole and Ron. That person is O.J. Simpson. As for Glen, the truth is hard to pin down. He has claimed to have killed more than 70 people, but how much of that is real and how much for attention remains unknown. But one thing was certain, his time eventually ran out. On May 15, 2025, after spending 28 years on death row, Glen Rogers was executed. That morning, Glen woke up at 3:45 a.m. For his final meal, he requested a pizza, chocolate cake, and a soda. He also had one last visit from his wife. Later that day, he was strapped to the gurney. When asked for any last words, Glen looked toward the witnesses and spoke directly to those he loved: his wife, brothers, his sons, grandchildren, and a close friend who had helped with his final appeals. Then turning to the victims' families, he said, "I know there's a lot of questions that you need answers to. I promise you in the near future the questions will be answered, and I hope in some way we'll bring you closure." He said, "President Trump, keep making America great. I'm ready to go." Then the drugs began to flow. Glen lay still as the lethal injection started. Within 2 minutes, his eyes closed and his mouth fell open. As the process continued, his face slowly turned pale. At one point, a staff member grasped him by the shoulders, shook him and yelled, "Rogers, Rogers!" checking for any sign of consciousness. There was none. Glen Rogers pronounced dead at 6:16 p.m. He was 62 years old.